Hi, everybody. This is very Neek from the IJR. I'm just speaking under the IJR name. Let me just put my camera on to say hi to everyone. Um, okay. I won't be on camera. I won't be on camera, but I'll be in the background if anybody needs assistance. Kezia will explain a little bit further. So, yeah.
Hi V.
Hi, Danny. Love to see you. No.
Ignore my video.
You.
Hi everyone. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yay. Okay, progress. Thank you for that. Sorry, we were having a bit of a technical issue, but that's why we kind of do these quick little practice runs before the webinar. I think before we go, maybe we can just all introduce ourselves just so we can get a bit familiar with each other and each other's names before the dialogue. But just want to start this off by saying that obviously this is more of a discussion. So we're kind of looking a lot for a lot of organic conversation. Well, we did obviously send questions through. I think just kind of go as you kind of feel called to as well. So yeah. Danielle, do you want to kind of take us off by introducing yourself?
Sure, I can do that. Good morning, everyone. I feel like I should say good afternoon, but technically we're not there yet. I'm Danielle Hofmeister, and I'm the project lead for youth identity at the IJR.
Perfect. I think I'll just go next. So hi everyone, my name is Kezia Abrahams. I've obviously been the one that has been emailing all of you, so thank you for that. And I'm the communications officer at the IJR. So if anyone feels like they can go next, please do so.
Hey guys, I'm Nandembe Kela. I'm the communications intern. I have talked to some of you guys, but majority of you I haven't.
Good morning. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
We can hear you. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Ntsika Mzananda from Project Youth South Africa. I think that's why I was invited because of Project Youth South Africa. But yeah, I'm excited to be involved. I think that's as much as I can say.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us for the practice run and looking forward to your dialogue.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Darla. How are you?
I'm good. How is everyone?
We're good, thank you. We're just kind of going around the room, just introducing each other so we can get familiar with one another. So maybe you can just introduce yourself and just say a bit about yourself as well.
Yes, sure. My name is Dala Rudakubana. I'm based in Rwanda. I am a communication specialist who's worked in the field for over 17 years. I'm currently working for GIZ Rwanda, covering the Great Lakes region cluster. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you so much, and we're looking forward to your insights today. Stacey, I don't know if you would like to go next.
Yes, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Stacey Frew. I'm an 18-year-old author and activist based in South Africa. I come representing my foundation, the Stacey Frew Foundation, and I look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us during, I think it's exam period. We're very
Yeah, I
grateful.
have an exam tomorrow, so unfortunately I won't be able to stay until the end, but
No
I'll be
problem.
here for
Thank
my
you.
part.
We look forward to your insights as well. Anyone else? Fadzai, I don't know if you would like to go next.
Okay, I can go. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for putting this together and all the work behind the scenes to make this possible. My name is Fadzai. I am currently in Windhoek, Namibia, and I am a lawyer and I work at the intersection of international law, social justice, green energy, the whole bunch. But I'm really excited today to be speaking about the lived realities of young people on the continent. not as an expert, but just to provoke thought. And I'm looking forward to hearing everyone else's thoughts and discussions as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And yes, definitely looking forward to your insights as well. Obviously not as an expert, but also I think as we can all kind of say that we do still fit into, mostly fit into the youth category. Tamanda, I don't know if you'd like to go next.
Sure. Okay. Um, Hi, everyone. My name is Damanda Liabunya. I'm from Malawi, but I'm currently based in China, Hong Kong. Um, I am a co-founder of Ukutula Malawi, which is a mental health NGO, and I am also a researcher in politics and migration. I'm so excited for this because this is a conversation that I think needs to be had, especially in mental health, especially with young people. And I'm just so excited to meet all of you and hear your thoughts. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. And wow, Hong Kong is quite a far distance away. So I think the one panelist we might be missing is Washington, who will kind of also be touching on to mental health. But I also just want to say that obviously while there are themes, if you feel also that you can kind of comment on another theme as well, like please do so. It is a discussion. We kind of will just be sharing insights, thoughts, and just trying to like provoke people's thoughts a bit more. Yes, Rosita?
So, good morning, everyone. I don't know if you guys can can hear me. Sorry, I went off for a birthday. But yes, so my name is Rosvita Ndumbu. I am a researcher, legal researcher at the Institute for Public Policy Research. My background is in law. So it's a pleasure to be here. Like everybody else said previously, I look forward to hearing everybody's insights on this very important topic. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. So we still do have a few minutes left over. I think everyone that was able to join early has introduced themselves. So I think one of the main reasons for starting it early is just to also check that the video I'd like to play at the beginning is able to do so as well. And then as soon as 12 o'clock starts, we can start the webinar. So thank you all. Hi, Melinda. How are you? Uh, I don't know if she's able to talk now as well, but we've also just been joined by the IGR's head of comms. I think obviously she'll also introduce herself once she gets a chance. Can I also ask that as soon as we start the webinar, can everyone also turn on their cameras? We're currently just trying to get the video ready. Danielle, Danielle, can you, we're having issues with the video, so can you kick start us? We're just gonna, I think, proceed without it. Thank you.
Sorry, can you just repeat that, Kezia? You're having trouble with the video?
We're having trouble with the video, so if you can kind of, as soon as we click start, then you can kind of just start with your welcoming introductions then instead. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so I'll just start. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this online conversation of being young in Africa today. Thank you to the organizers, particularly the comms team at IGR, for the invitation to open up today's dialogue. And thank you all for being here, particularly our speakers. Just a short introduction of who I am. My name is Danielle Hofmeister. I'm a project lead working at the intersection of identity, justice, belonging, and storytelling at the IJR. Most of my work is with young people in small towns and rural communities across South Africa, so the kinds of places that are often overlooked. At a personal level, I also want to share that I am an ADHDer and an advocate for neurodivergent support and inclusion, especially in under-resourced areas. I saw that the topic of mental health is on today's agenda, and I got really excited about it. So I'd like to be the first to contribute toward destigmatization today. It's an honor for me to open the conversation today, not because I believe any of us here hold all the answers or intend to offer up all the answers, but because I believe very deeply in the power of youth-led dialogue, especially when it's honest and grounded and inclusive of those whose voices are so often left out. We are here today to mark Youth Day and Youth Month in South Africa and the Day of the African Child, two significant commemorations, both rooted in struggle. Youth Day in South Africa reminds us of the 1976 Soweto uprising, when Black students rose up against an oppressive regime and were met with state violence. And the Day of the African Child, initiated by the African Union, honors those same students while drawing necessary attention to the challenges children across the continent continue to face. And both of these, Youth Day and Day of the African Child, are at their core about young people's courage and tenacity, as well as our justifiable anger. They're about how young people have historically taken anger, that deep sense of injustice, and channeled it into something meaningful, something transformative. I think that too often as young people, we're told to tone it down, to be respectful, to be patient, especially when we're angry. But I think that anger has always been at the heart of youth-led change. So from 1976 to the Fees Must Fall movements, to all the movements we see erupting across the continent today. Older generations sometimes treat young people's anger like it's something dangerous, something to be feared or quelled or managed. And I think that perhaps they fear it because they understand how powerful that anger is. And I want to quote one feminist icon who I loved. Her name is Audre Lorde. She once said that my fear of anger taught me nothing, and your fear of anger will teach you nothing also. In her essay, The Uses of Anger, Women Responding to Racism, she reminds us that anger is loaded with information, that it can act as a spotlight for growth, and that when it's expressed and channeled toward vision and justice, it's not destruction, but it's liberation. And the anger that we as young people carry, the anger at racism, at sexual and gender-based violence, at exclusion from spaces and institutions that were never built with us in mind, that anger of ours is not the problem. I think the problem is a society that tells us as young people to swallow it and then wonders why we're choking. So I'd like also to be clear here, lest anyone misconstrue what I'm saying. I am specifically talking about anger, not hatred. Anger, in its clearest form, I think, is a demand for something better. It's a refusal to make peace with injustice, and I believe it belongs in this conversation. So the youth of 1976 were angry, and that anger propelled them to boldly confront the enemy that was apartheid. And in so doing, those young people shifted the arc of South African history. But today, I think the chains are a bit harder to break because the systems that harm us have become less visible. The chains are now bureaucratic or institutional and often also internalized. And as young people, we don't always agree on who or what the enemy even is. And I think that confusion is part of what keeps us stuck sometimes. Meanwhile, younger people, we continue to shoulder the weight of inequality, of exclusion, and of an uncertain and insecure future. So in the work that I do, I meet heavily burdened youth all of the time. Youth trying to find a way forward with very little in their corner. When I was thinking about this conversation we are having today, so many of the young people I work with came to mind, and the circumstances they are trapped within oftentimes also came to my mind. One particular person is a 21-year-old boy, technically a man, but a boy, I know, who has failed grade 10 again and again. And not because he lacks potential. I think he's enormously talented, but because he's likely neurodivergent. And he reminds me a lot of myself as an ADHD person. But unlike me, he hasn't been diagnosed. He hasn't had that privilege. So he lives in a village where there are no psychological support services. And in places like his, ADHD isn't even a concept people are familiar with. So he's been failed in silence year after year by a system that doesn't recognize him. I've also encountered young people who suffered the indignity of poverty so much that they don't even have a bar of soap. Girls who miss school every month because they don't have access to sanitary towels, not because they're lazy or don't care, but because of poverty. And in these particular cases that I'm mentioning right now, I've heard accounts of school learners or school leaders, people entrusted with care, stealing resources intended for learners and taking them home to their own families. And when young people come to me with these kinds of stories, when I hear it, I wonder, how do young people even begin to protect themselves in situations like that? Who do they report it to when they're deprived of a safety net? In my work, I've also been told horror stories by young girls being assaulted by older men, sometimes neighbors, more often family members, girls who have literally bared the scars on their wrists to me and my team members and told us that they're afraid to go back home, when home is supposed to be the safest place, the place where they belong and enjoy support. And the saddening truth is that these experiences aren't anomalies. They're everyday realities, and that should make us angry. These young people I'm referencing, these young people that I work with, they're not here today, and they're not on this panel, and they're not in the chat, and they're also not quoting our policy briefs. By and large, they're excluded by language, by technology, by infrastructure, and by design. And that exclusion is unjust, and again, it should make us angry. Because we can't talk about youth development or youth inclusion without acknowledging who continues to be left out, who has been left out, and who is still being failed. But at the same time, I don't want to paint this as a story of hopelessness, because that would be antithetical to what we're trying to do today. And I also don't want to frame it as poverty porn, because I've also seen extraordinary resilience among the young people that I work with. I've witnessed young people do very, very great, big things with very, very little. So ours is a generation that's often accused of apathy, of being disconnected, and I can understand the argument, but that has not been my overall experience. So I've had the privilege of working with young people who go out of their way to learn something, or to learn everything rather, that they can about their own cultures, just so that they can teach younger children in their communities and help those children foster a sense of identity and belonging, where they may feel disconnected and where they may be searching still. I've also seen young people organize annual back-to-school programs where they collect and distribute school shoes, uniforms, even offer haircuts, because they know the confidence that comes with being prepared. And they do so with almost no support or credit. I've met young people who catch the seeds from their gardens so that they can go and replant them at the nearby creche. So babies and toddlers at that creche can be fed. Others host weekend sports tournaments, not for clout or profit, but because they want to give other young people something joyful and something safe to do outside of Groove. And again, they do this with very little support. They often visit their municipalities to ask for assistance, but when they get there, they hear, fill in these 10 forms, and they get no guidance on how to do so correctly. Or they're told, go and see this one and this one at XYZ office, but this one and that one is never available. And so those young people become very discouraged, and their contribution to their community is delayed. And eventually, they get to a point of such deep frustration, but instead of washing their hands and taking a back seat, I've seen them go ahead and do what needs to be done without the support they are due. And I think that's what upliftment looks like. That's what youth leadership looks like. And these are the young people that majority of our society says don't care. but they do, and they do deeply. We've had young people show up to our workshops hungry, yet they still participate, still share, still lead. And many of them don't just stop there in the workshops. They go on to start their own small businesses or launch community podcasts when none existed before, all in an effort to tell their stories or their community stories in unfiltered and unmediated ways. And in so doing, they're asserting that their voices matter, that they exist. Some have even gone on to study law, engineering, nursing, paths that many thought were not possible for them. And here I actually want to pause and just take a moment to acknowledge the people that have come alongside us and alongside the young people we work with, who have seen young people's talent and their grit and stepped up to support us. People like Dr. Jacob Kluter from the University of the Western Cape, Dr. Lorato Mokoena from UNISA, Sean Cairns from Seed to Harvest, and community leaders like Dr. Mtunkulu in KZN. And Dr. Mtunkulu particularly rallied her networks in her community to financially support first-year students coming from our workshops. And so without their tangible support, I think that a lot of our achievements today would not be possible. Then in this country, beyond resilience, there's brilliance as well. And particularly if I'm looking at the whole of South Africa, if you look at the young developers in Limpopo who created the Nova app, which is a learning app supporting students across the country, that is incredible that they've done so. And again, they've done so with very little support. And you look also at the enthusiasm with which young people are joining initiatives like the FNB App Academy. Even though it's not accredited, it doesn't come with official recognition. There's such a hunger in young South African people, particularly, not just to survive, not just to catch up, but to learn, to build, and to create. And the talent is there, and it is enormous talent, and the intelligence is there as well. And it's always been, no matter what the racist narratives have tried to imply. What's missing is the support, the access, the political will, and the follow-through. I think too often, particularly for today, when we celebrate youth leadership, we tend to center the most visible, the most fluent in English, like myself, the ones who are polished and palatable to donors and decision makers. And while there is value in that, it's not the whole story. The leadership I see daily doesn't always look like what's on this platform today that I'm part of. It often looks like caring for your siblings when no one else can, or sharing your food that you might not really have. It looks like trying again and again to finish school in a system that's set up to work against you. That has been my experience in the communities that I work in with the young people I work with. So as we reflect today in this conversation on identity, on activism, on mental health and solidarity, how we can build solidarity, I hope we're willing to hold space for all of this, the hard and uncomfortable truths as well as the hopeful ones, the messiness and the brilliance of South African youth, because youth in South Africa isn't just the future, as we're so often told. We are the present. We're already leading, often without the mic, without the spotlight, and sometimes without the right language, but we're leading nonetheless. And if we're serious about building something better, I believe across sectors, across countries, then collaboration has to be at the center of our work. We have to find ways to work together across provincial, across linguistic and national borders. Ethnic differences cannot be allowed to divide us. Borders cannot be allowed to isolate us. Solidarity isn't just a nice thing to have. It's not just an add-on. It is essential to the kind of work that we're all looking to do. And none of us can do this work alone. And honestly, we shouldn't have to. So I'm going to end my opening there. And I don't know if I should hand over to Opal Sibanda, or if I should make some time for the screening. Kezia, you let me know.
No problem. I'll take it from here. Thank you so much, Danielle, for such a powerful opening remarks. I think one of the things from what you were saying that stood out to me quite a lot is that there is a hunger amongst the youth to learn, build, and create. And obviously, you were referencing South Africa, but I feel like it's something that you can see across the African continent. Is like you mentioned, like there's just this motivation to want something better, to change, to do better, not just for themselves, for their communities, but for Africa as a whole. For those joining us, my name is Kezia Abrahams. I am the Communications Officer at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. As mentioned by my colleague Danielle, we are hosting this dialogue to give voice to the aspirations, struggles, and lived experiences of young people across the African continent. And I'm honored to introduce our distinguished speakers from today, whom are all making meaningful contributions within the youth space across the continent. We are going to begin with Ms. Opal Sibanda, a legal researcher at the Secretariat of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. So, Ms. Opal, if you are able to go next, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kezia, and thank you very much to the moderator. I am very happy to take part in this very important webinar commemorating the Day of the African Child. So let me not waste time and move straight to the keynote address. So I wish to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation to the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation for the invitation to the ASAREC Secretariat to contribute to today's dialogue. I would say it is both an honor and a responsibility to be part of a space that reflects the voices and the experiences and the agency of Africa's youth. So just to share with you briefly, in the past 3 days, I had a privilege of participating in the continental commemoration of the Day of the African Child in Malawi. And to share with you that what stood out for me was the meaningful engagement that we had with children. We had children from across Africa that were gathered not simply as attendees, but as actors. They shared their personal experiences of courage, of frustration, as well as resilience. So these children that we engaged with reflected on this year Day of the African Child theme, which is planning and budgeting for children's rights progress since 2010. So what stood out for me is that they asked very critical questions to their governments, to civil society organizations, and other stakeholders on what progress has been done when it comes to planning and budgeting for their rights. They also spoke about the inequalities they still face in accessing quality education, healthcare, and protection, among other things. They also challenged the structures that exclude them from decision-making and participating in issues that affect them. They were clear in what they wanted from their governments. They want investment, they want accountability, and they want meaningful child participation. So these children, from their inputs, it actually helped them to shape a collective outcome statements with recommendations to African Union member states, civil society organizations, and other actors. And I believe that the perspectives that were shared by these children are directly relevant to the theme that brings us together today, which is being young in Africa today and co-creating solutions. So to be young in Africa today is to be navigating a continent of both deep promise and profound disparity. The youth today are organizing, they are leading, they are building, but often with very limited support. And they are demanding shift from symbolic consultation to genuine co-creation. When we look at the youth today, we see that the language of youth engagement has evolved, rather. But the lived realities remain familiar, and that is why today's theme is very important. So allow me to emphasize that to co-create is not merely to include. It is to design, to shape, and to own. And to be young in Africa today is to carry both the weight of structural exclusion and the force of radical imagination. So still looking at what we are going to reflect on today, I think or believe that this reflection takes place within the broader framework of the Day of the African Child theme, which I mentioned, which is planning and budgeting for children's rights. So 15 years after the 2010 commitment, member states have been called to assess whether those commitments have moved beyond declarations and into practice. So we would agree that some progress is evident, but children themselves are reminding us that budgets, however well designed, are not enough unless they reflect the lived realities, unless they attract, and unless young people have a role in shaping how and where resources are directed. Africa's youth are not a very special interest group. I would say Africans' youth are the majority. We are the majority. Youth are not simply numbers, they are the future electorate, the future workforce, the future custodians of peace, knowledge, and progress. So currently, we all know that over 60% of Africa's population is under the age of 25, and nearly half are under the age of 18. And we note from statistics that by 2055, Africa will be home to more than 1 billion children and youth, accounting for nearly 40% of the global youth population. So these colleagues are not just demographic figures. They are compelling or a compelling call to action. No serious development policy, no national budget, no planning instrument can be credible if it does not account for and meaningfully involve the continent's young majority. So, dear colleagues, this is why regional commitments such as Agenda 2040 and Agenda 2063 matter now more than ever. When we look at Agenda 2040, which was adopted by the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, it envisions an Africa that is fit for children. It outlines the 10 aspirations, among them that is every child is protected against violence, treated equally, has access to quality education and health services, and is free to express themselves and to participate. Looking at Agenda 2063, the African Union's broader strategic vision, it calls for an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its citizens and relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and the youth. So both these frameworks are not simply policy blueprints. They are moral and political compasses, and they insist that children and youth are not only recipients of progress, but they are the principal architects. So dear colleagues, and as we move on to today's dialogue, I wish to highlight the significance of the themes that are going to be discussed today, looking at the lived realities of youth. We know that we cannot respond effectively to what we do. We have to acknowledge first. So this session is critical because it grounds the discussion in direct experience, from inequality and exclusion to strength and survival. And it reminds us that development must begin with listening. Moving to activism, legacy, and identity. We know that across Africa, young people are building new movements for gender justice, for education, for democracy, but they are also drawing from deep historical roots. So I believe this session will speak to the continuity of the resistance and the power of reclaiming identity as a political act. Mental health and well-being of the youth. This is too often overlooked in planning, yet it is very central to every other outcome. Young people are naming mental health, including trauma, stress, and systemic pressure, as a priority. So this conversation must inform how governments plan and support the youth in general. And lastly, moving to Pan-African youth solidarity. This is a powerful reminder that today's youth are not isolated actors. We are building across borders, forming networks, platforms, and movements that defy narrow definitions of citizenship or geography. And I believe that this session will show us how youth in Africa are modeling the kind of Africa that policy still imagines. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe each of these themes tells us something very important. Together, they reveal a truth that young people are not waiting to be empowered. Young people are exercising power through action, through advocacy, and through imagination. And what remains is for systems, institutions, and leadership to respond in kind, not with resistance, but with partnership. So, in conclusion, as we mark the Day of the African Child, this is not just a moment of reflection, it is a moment of recognition. Recognition that we as young people are not the future waiting to happen. We are actually shaping the present every day and in every space we can reach. Across this continent, we are organizing, speaking, creating, and demanding better, not only for ourselves, but for those that are coming after us. The question is no longer whether young people are ready. The question is whether systems and leadership are ready to truly share power. We are not asking for space. We are already in it. We are not waiting for permission. We are already leading. So what we ask is for our voices as young people to be met with respect, our ideas with trust, and our presence with partnership. And this is what co-creating solution looks like. That is what being young in Africa today requires and offers. So with these brief remarks, I thank you and I wish you fruitful deliberations today. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Opal. It was truly insightful. And I think one of the standaways also was just obviously involving the role of the youth in Africa in a lot of our efforts. And I think linked to that, we'll kind of be going into our first theme of dialogue today, which is the lived reality of African youth. And I'm pleased to introduce two of our panelists, Ms. Fadzai, consultant at AfriEmerge Global, and Mr. Nsiki, who is the director at Project Youth. So, Ms. Fadzai, I think you can kind of introduce yourselves, and then I kind of want to lead in with the first question. Based on your cross-continental work, how would you compare the access to rights among young people in different countries? Thank you. Take it away.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Not sure if everyone can hear me. I sincerely apologize for the echo. I am sitting in a boardroom and I didn't know that it would have such terrible feedback. Thank you very much to the IJR for convening this conversation. I think I sincerely applaud the work that you're doing in creating a platform for us to deliberate and share ideas. My name is Fadzai. I am consulting with the AfriEmerge Global. And the work that we do ensures that African voices are represented in the different interventions that are taken by global institutes and by international organizations. So today I want to share not just from my work, I think that would not do justice, but I took it upon myself the entire week last week to talk to different young people and try and understand what some of the lived realities are on the ground that young people are facing. Now, when I read this topic, the theme, lived realities of young people on the continent, it sort of gave me the idea that, look, there's a policy that exists, there's a theory that exists, but that is not the lived reality on the ground that young people are facing. So we have this blueprint that is not what the reality on the ground is. And as a lawyer, looking at the different responses that I got in my understanding of the work, I realized that what young people are facing today as a lived reality is an issue of access. And when I refer to access, I'm trying to give a broader picture of what, because we can list what all our lived realities are. We can list unemployment, we can list climate change, we can list peace and security. But when all of that comes together, in my understanding, it became an issue of access. Now, I want to address access in the broader sense, but more particularly access to fundamental rights and access to fundamental freedoms. Now, every constitution that I've had the privilege to look at has a chapter 3, it has a Bill of Rights, it has a section that mostly focuses on the fundamental human rights and fundamental freedoms. Now, while progress has been made, I don't want to be here and say no work has been done, because we are having this conversation as proof that we are making progress as young people on the continent. But I want to address issues of fundamental rights and issues of fundamental freedoms as a thought-provoking discussion. And I would love to hear feedback at the end of the 5 minutes that I have. Now, fundamental rights and fundamental freedoms include our protection to life as young people, our right to human dignity as young people, our right to equality and freedom from discrimination as young people, fair arrest, fair trial, and work and not forced labor, our right to health. And now I have seen that in the study that I have done, our access to fundamental rights and freedoms have been largely influenced by structural inequalities and economic inclusion for young people. The youth unemployment rate on the continent is staggering. We cannot even begin to talk about it. The geographical divide, I think that is something that Danielle touched on, and I was really happy that as a point of departure, she touched on that. There's a lived reality of a geographical divide among young people, where urban youth have more access to these fundamental rights and freedoms than young people that are in rural areas and facing a systematic neglect to their fundamental human rights and freedoms. Now, we all know that as young people, we are now politically aware, we are politically active, and with that has come a violation to our fundamental freedom of expression by political intimidation. So, my understanding of our lived reality at the moment is an issue of access, the ability to access and the lack thereof. I also want to touch on something that I think I may be digressing, but I want to touch on the issue of youth unemployment and the mirage of entrepreneurship that we have been sold to say that entrepreneurship is the silver bullet that is coming to save us from youth unemployment. It may be that as young people, it's a good thing that we're taking a proactive approach to addressing youth unemployment. But when are we going to have the conversation around the system failing? When are we going to have the conversation around the system failing to absorb all these brilliant minds, the graduates that it has skilled, and then making entrepreneurship look like it's the silver bullet that is coming to save us? Yet the acceleration of it is a sign of a system that has failed, and a lack of structural support and a lack of policies that are prioritizing young people and absorbing them into the system. I think I have a few minutes left, but I want to touch also on our how all of this, the lack of access to our fundamental rights and our fundamental freedoms, has then resulted in a threat to peace and security on the continent. I think the subject of peace and security is one that I'm really passionate about. Young people have been labeled as hooligans, we don't listen, we don't follow systems, but all of that is just a reaction to lack of access to fundamental rights, to fundamental freedoms. Activism has been criminalized. So I think with that, I just want to leave you with this and just to think about access. Are you able to access your fundamental rights and freedoms? And can we say that the blueprint that exists on paper is really what young people are facing on the ground in terms of access to opportunities? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And you're so true. Like, while these policies are great, it's actually having them in practice that is what matters. And you touched on access, and I think one of the things I'm also kind of highlighting a lot, or for myself stood out, was obviously speaking about structural inequality. And from a South African context, obviously, a lot of the structural inequalities we have do stem from apartheid. And kind of going into your piece, Mr. Nsika, as someone deeply engaged in youth development in South Africa, how do you see the legacy of apartheid and current socio-economic inequalities shaping the everyday realities of young people? Thank you. You may take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Kezia. So I think this is quite the topic at the moment. The whole month, everyone's discussing this thing. Firstly, maybe just introduce myself. I'm Nsika Yoshanga Azaniam Zananda from Project Youth South Africa, and a number of other organizations, but I'll just keep it at that. So I just want to quickly get into this topic. one of the things we must realize, and I think we tend to overlook it when we talk about Youth Day or the Day of the African Child, is what is it exactly that drove the youth of 76 to go into the streets? And when you do a deep dive study, I wrote an article about this about 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I can't remember now. And when you look at it in detail, you realize that it was the Black consciousness directly that drove those students to the ground, that drove the students to the streets. It was Black consciousness. So therefore, to understand what drove the students to the streets, you must understand what created Black consciousness. What was the mandate of Black consciousness? And very easily you will realize that Black consciousness was directly about changing the perceptions of African youth about the Africans. What does it mean to be African? What is the beauty in Blackness, as the common term is known now, the beauty in Black, and Black Power also kind of adopted that same approach in America. So they clearly, the mandate of Black consciousness was to face the psychosocial impacts of colonization and apartheid. And I think one of the things we don't talk about now is the fact that the generation of now, my generation in particular, that generation of 2000, late 90s, 2000s, is suffering from more than 300 years of generational trauma that has not been addressed. Therefore, our lived experience right now is that one of, we don't know what the quality and the beauty of Blackness is, what the quality and beauty of being African is. That's why you'll find Black people, not Black people only, just young people in Africa leaving by the hundreds, going overseas and stuff like that. Dr. Mandela will tell you that they choose to become cleaners overseas, dignified cleaners overseas that are labeled au pair, rather than to work in their own country with degrees. These are people with degrees that are working as au pairs, cleaners, in his words, in America, but they've got degrees in their own country, in their home country, but they don't believe in the economy of their country. They don't believe in Africa. They don't believe in themselves. To not believe in Africa is not believe in yourself, because you are Africa. You are the embodiment of this continent. You are her people. So there's this big psychosocial impact of this 300-year legacy of our history that needs to be addressed. I'm currently writing on this, so it's quite an exciting topic for myself. And I think for us to truly commemorate this day and to truly understand the lived realities of Africans, that is one thing we must address. How do we perceive ourselves as Africans before we can talk about drawing up a new sketch of what Africa should look like and then where we want? Because I think even in that conversation, these are things that have happened. Those are mandates that have been drawn up so long ago. Agenda 2063 is something that has been spoken about since the 1930s, 1940s. W.E.B. Du Bois was talking about in the 1920s. So these things have been in place for so long, but we cannot achieve Agenda 2063 because we are not confident in ourselves. We don't believe in ourselves as African. We are suffering from the psychosocial impacts. So it's a very important conversation. I don't know if you want me to loop into the next one, Kizia, so I don't waste your time.
Yes, of course. You can keep going. Thank you so much.
Sorry. Oh, so with the projects and the work that I, in terms of what I think the lived realities are on the ground from what I've seen in the work I do is, for example, I've got this case on my table at the current moment of Nolwazi Zulu. Miss Nolwazi Zulu is a student at CPUT. Last year in October 2024, she was violently sexually assaulted by a shuttle driver at CPUT, employed by HGTS, which is an outsourced company used by the CPUT, the school itself, to shuttle to obviously transport the students. And that is a case that has been reported to police, the institution, and the company last year in October. Till this day, nothing has been done about it. Last week, I released a public letter about it, about the situation, because I contacted the Deputy Minister to help out, who, by the way, she was very quick to jump to the matter. She really came through. But the issue is this: I gave her the contact details, I give her everything. She gives it to her office, and the office has done nothing. The office has totally done nothing. They've totally rejected this young lady, and that is the lived experience of young people. They feel rejected. She has not received any help. We're still fighting for it. I've sent a letter to the Portfolio Committee on Higher Education to demand that security be brought in to account for what had happened. And even the minister's office, someone needs to respond as to why the minister's office has done nothing about it. So these are questions that are looming in the background, and I think need to be drawn into the conversation. That is the lived experience of a university student. That I can get sexually assaulted and nothing will happen. Whether I report it or not, nothing will happen. We've got another project here in the Eastern Cape in a village called Namago, where Umamuno Simply leads an organization called Abanebongo People with Disabilities, for young people, by the way. She had asked Project Youth South Africa to come through. This project has been on my table for more than a year now, and I'd assured her that we'd come to her and do the project there for the young people. The project is completely done. Concepts notes, everything, project plans are done. Nobody wants to touch the rural development. Rural youth development, nobody wants to fund it. Nobody wants to touch it. The rural youth is rejected. So that is the lived experience of young people in South Africa. They are being rejected at every turn of the road, whether it be institutions, whether it be funding opportunities, whether it be educational opportunities. Nobody wants to develop the youth. So they are rejected, and that is the lived experience of young people. That is why you'll find when we do voter registration campaigns and I speak to these young people, they tell me, I don't care about voting because it does nothing for me. Must I leave my baby at home? This is a child, by the way, that fell pregnant in high school, a teenage pregnancy, now 21, sitting with a 3-year-old child. Must I leave my child at home when nobody's going to take care of him because we busted? Must I leave this child at home to go stand in a queue for 5 hours to vote for someone who's not going to even care about me? That is the issue we are in. And then people want to tell me about voter apathy. There's no such a thing, So these are the lived experiences of young people that must be addressed.
Thank you so much for that, Nsika. And I think, again, one of the key standways was you obviously speaking about Black consciousness and obviously Black identity, which kind of leads into our next theme of activism, legacy, and identity. And we are pleased to introduce our panelists, Ms. Stacey Frew, child author, rights activist, and founder of the Stacey Frew Foundation, and Ms. Rose Leather, who is a research associate at the Institute for Public Policy Research and an alumnus of the Young African Leaders Initiative. Ms. Stacey, I think you can kind of start us off with, in your view, what does youth activism look like in Africa today? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And once again, thank you so much to the IJR for having me on this beautiful platform. Just before I begin addressing the question, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Stacey Frew. I'm an 18-year-old author and activist based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I started my literature journey at the age of 7 years old when I published my first storybook titled Smelly Cats. And ever since then, my work has been centered around getting the youth to take a bigger part in literacy and just showing a general interest in education, because I believe sincerely that education is a tool out of poverty, and education is also a tool against all these different things that we currently see going across in the world. So in my view, activism in Africa today is extremely diverse. I mean, this is a very multifaceted question, and I also think that it's deeply contextual to where in Africa we're specifically addressing. And this context or the activism that stems from these different countries is based on the history of the country. So the activism that we see happening within West and Central Africa will be vastly different from the activism we see happening within Southern Africa. And personally, I think in Southern Africa, for example, in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, youth activism is more centered around the decolonization of education and unemployment and political accountability, because we had one of the more unique forms of colonization where our colonizers came and settled within the land. And so that's why we see the movements such as the Fees Must Fall and how children are constantly challenging more systematic forms of oppression that we see that are present within our societies. And I think the activism we see from the youth obviously centers the youth. And the knowledge that it produces. I also think that youth activism validates youth experiences. So from the speakers before, we heard a lot about the struggles that the youth are facing. And in order to actively protest that, we have to acknowledge and validate the experiences of what many are going through in this time. And it also strengthens the notion that the youth are not just the future, but we are the present as well. As the keynote speaker said, over 60% of Africa's population is under the age of 25 years old. So this is not an issue of where we're now looking into the future to see what can change. We want change within the present, because currently the youth are the driving force within this continent. So I would also say that youth-led movements have always been centered to any kind of a liberation, and it will continue to be this way because we have such a large young population, of course. And it's also a fact of self-determination, trying to sort of find movement within structures that don't allow for youth voices or that infantilize what the youth are going through. I mean, oftentimes from the older generations, you'll see them consistently infantilize the problems that youth are going through. So, for example, with the unemployment, many of them will call our generation lazy. They'll say we're not willing to work, but the main problem is that there are no jobs. I mean, who wouldn't want to work to be able to sustain their being? So I think that's also a very big thing within activism movements today, like being able to find space and be given a voice, which is why I think platforms like this are very important, because we are hearing from what we would consider youth and our outlooks on activism. So I think as well, the difference we're also seeing in activism today, I'm not going to say it's more passive, but I do think that it's becoming more creative because we're now focusing on different kinds of activism. So digital activism was a very big thing that sort of blew up around the COVID era, where people were now mobilizing social media to do their activism. So to hold webinars like this, or create online forums where people discuss topics on what can be done within what they're trying to challenge. So social media activism has also become very big within the youth of today. And yeah, I think my last point would be responsibility. I feel like a lot of the youth feel like now it is their responsibility, or our responsibility rather, to push for change, because we obviously are able to recognize that the older generations do not seem to care much about what is going to happen to us when or if what they're perpetuating continues to exist. So that's.
Thank you so much for that. And I really enjoyed what you spoke about when you said that activism has become more creative, especially as Danielle had mentioned earlier, that just the chains have gone a lot harder. So obviously with the chains being harder, we're trying to find new and creative ways to just kind of overcome the struggles. And one powerful thing you said was that youth are not just the future. I think we tend to focus on what's to come, but they're also the present. Like what's happening to you today, right now, is obviously just so crucial. That's why we're having a dialogue such as this. And Ms. Ravita, I would just like to know from your perspective and from your experience, kind of touching on what Ms. Stacey said, how do you see today's youth activism connecting with or diverging from the legacy of historical liberation movements in Southern Africa?
So thank you so much for that question, Kezia. Good morning, everyone. It's truly a pleasure to be here and contribute my 2 cents to such an important discussion. As introduced, my name is Rosvita Ndumbu. I am a Namibian researcher and lawyer with a background in public policy and human rights, and I'm currently based at the Institute for Public Policy and Research. Now, this question is quite important, right? I think in the sense that I think we can all agree that to a very large extent, there is nothing new under the sun. and everything exists because of something else, and it's a continuity, right? So I think in reflecting on this question in preparation for today's conversation, especially in the context of Southern Africa, I think it's both important to recognize continuity and evolution, right? So, in terms of historical liberation movements, we see that they were fundamentally about reclaiming political freedom and human dignity in the face of colonialism and apartheid, right? And those struggles were waged by young people who saw that their futures were being shaped without them, and they responded by stepping into history. And that is essentially what the Soweto uprising is, as young people deciding, no, we will not allow our future to be dictated by other people anymore, right? And we also have the same experience in Namibia, right? When we look at our liberation struggle. Now, today's activism or youth activism connects with that legacy in the sense that our activism is still deeply rooted in a desire for justice, equity, and dignity. But the front lines have shifted. And Danielle, earlier on in her introductory remarks, said that the systems that harm us have become less clear. So it's not as easy for us to identify the enemy which we are fighting, right? So the nature of our oppressor is not as clear as our forefathers who fought against colonialism and apartheid and so forth. Our fight is often more complex, right? And it deals with societal issues such as corruptions within governance structures, economic disparities, lack of access to quality education, which is a huge issue, and healthcare, and the impact of climate change. Now, like I said, these are issues that stem rather from a lack of or a failure in governance rather than external domination, right? And these are the new battlegrounds that young people today in the African continent have to deal with. And from my own policy research in Namibia, I've seen how young people are using tools that weren't available to past generations. And this is where the divergence that you asked comes in. I know Stacey earlier on in her contributions touched on digital activism, which is a huge thing for a lot of activists and young people in the continent, because we are such a connected generation that social media platforms have become a modern day protest ground, right? So when we do go to the streets and when we do protest, the songs that we sing are the same. The placards that we're holding usually are the same, bear the same message, but our activism has gone a step further into the digital realm, right? Now, this digital form of activism sometimes diverges from older models of resistance, which were more centralized and hierarchical. Whereas youth activism today tends to be more decentralized, intersectional, and agile. I think a perfect example of this in the Namibian context would be that of Shut It All Down, right, which we had a couple of years ago. And it was so decentralized that when the police came and wanted to find out who was the actual initiator of this chaos, they couldn't even pinpoint who, let's say, the leader was, because it happened on Twitter and everybody had started posting and so forth. So who do you say? Is it the first person that then said the tweet, retweeted? Is it when it got more traction? So where do you draw the line, right? So I think this is what we mean when we say that activism has evolved. And while it has evolved, I think we must still confront the reality that many of the underlying issues that our forefathers or the people before us were fighting against. So these are issues such as poverty, inequality, and exclusion. These, unfortunately, are still issues that we are fighting also, right? So there has been an evolvement of some sort, but not to a very large degree. So I think the task for our generation is to a very large degree to draw inspiration from the moral clarity and courage of past movements, but also to localize our strategies in ways that respond to the current challenges that are really unique to our generation alone. And I think the youth of today are doing quite well in that respect. So I think in terms of my addition, I will end it there.
So much for the insight. I think what is great about dialogues such as this is that you just we learn so much, but also, I mean, touching on the fact that, historically activism, youth activism specifically, has come from youth being unhappy by the fact that their futures being shaped without them. I think further just as a testament of the importance of dialogue such as this to give voice to the youth so that they kind of, like they do just play a role and they have a contribution towards their saying. And with that being said, we're kind of going to, go into our next theme, which is mental health and well-being. And just, I think, reflecting on myself and reflecting on the current generation of youth, I mean, we've seen youth kind of emphasizing this more compared to previous generations, just on mental health and on well-being, and also just recognizing that what we kind of have gone through previously, or what our parents or grandparents have gone through, continues to kind of filter into our own lives. And with that, I'd like to introduce our two panelists, Ms. Tambanda, the Executive Director of Ukutula Malawi, and Mr. Washington, Executive Director of Youth End Period Poverty. Ms. Tambanda, I would kind of like to kickstart with you and just kind of discuss, like, with regards to your work, how have you seen mental health challenges manifest among young people, and what cultural or systemic barriers do they face in accessing support? Thank you. You may take it away.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me. My name is Damanda Patience Liabunya. I'm from Malawi. I am the co-founder of Ukutula Malawi, which is a mental health NGO that focuses on youth empowerment and just mental health education. And I'm also a researcher in youth and politics, but that's a whole different thing. I'm so deeply honored to be part of this conversation, especially with a topic that is so necessary and so personal. And as we are reflecting on the Day of the African Child, I think we must recognize that African children and African youth are growing up in systems that too often expect strength, but rarely provide the support needed to sustain it. So when we talk of the many challenges and what cultural system barriers that we have, I'm going to speak on the part of Ukutula, and what I've seen is that it's exhibited in ways of such as rising suicide cases, especially in young men, and also to increase substance abuse and school dropouts, and even just a burnout, a very strong burnout from so many things that we're carrying as young people. I think Danielle and Opal mentioned how undeserved or underrated mental health is. But according to what we have learned, or rather what we have discovered, is that 1 in every 4 young people do have mental health problems. And think of that in a way of whereby 60% of the population in Africa is young people. That is a very huge amount of people going through mental health problems. So as we are marking the Day of the African Child, I think it's important to acknowledge that so many people across the continent are growing up in silence, whereby they're carrying trauma, they're carrying grief and anxiety in systems that do not prioritize their emotional well-being. And we are expected to survive and even thrive without the appropriate tools and spaces to process what we're facing. So, for instance, in Malawi, our government allocates less than 1% of the national budget to mental health. And that lack of this investment shows in every aspect of our lives. So you think of under-resourced clinics, you think of a severe shortage of trained professionals, and even the rising cases of suicide. So, but the barriers aren't just systematic, they're also very cultural. And this is through the persistent stigma that is around mental health. So for instance, especially young men, emotional distress is still seen as weakness or even a spiritual failure. We can say demonic or anything of that sort, but it's so much deeper. And this leads to silence, this leads to self-isolation, and they blame themselves. And this isn't just within like communities, but within our own families. I can speak for so many other people whereby I know they can't speak to their own families with what they're facing. And honestly, I've lived with some of that myself, whereby I didn't have the language to express what my constant sadness was, or the feeling of always being overwhelmed in public spaces and all these things and whatnot, you know? So it's great that I do have a supportive family and a supportive community, but not everyone is blessed like that. And also, Danielle mentioned something about not being diagnosed, which is something that is very, very prevalent in African societies, whereby a lot of young people are facing so much, but they really don't know how to mention it or how to figure it out because our systems do not allow us that privilege. So I think for us, it takes a lot of unlearning and also to realize that real strength isn't just silence, but also vulnerability isn't weakness. And I think as an African child, for us to heal, for us to prosper, we are supposed to feel, or rather deserve the right to feel, to heal, and to also be supported. But that is requiring a lot of support from so many other aspects in the system that continues to fail us. And young people are trying our best, but we, as Danielle said, and as Opo said, as everyone has said, is that we don't have a lot of support. And I think that is where the big problem is. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And such a powerful way to end with that. We deserve the right to feel. And you're so right. I think there's so many African youth that are just struggling to grapple what they're going through because we don't know what to call it. In a lot of places, you don't know how to really express what you are feeling and mention, especially I think across cultural systemic barriers, there's obviously a lot of unlearning that needs to be done. And a lot of relearning with that. And I just wanted to chat to Mr. Washington on the next question, which was kind of through your advocacy around menstrual health, how have you seen the intersection of body autonomy and mental health affect young people today? Thank you, Mr. Washington, if you are online.
Okay, perfect. So my sincere apologies. I'm unable to switch on my camera because I'm currently in transit. So thank you so much, Ajara, for the invitation to speak on this significant occasion, the Day of the African Child commemoration. And I bring you warm greetings from the Youth and Period Poverty Movement. I also acknowledge and stand on the protocol that has already been observed. Now, I want you to imagine something for a moment. I want you to close your eyes and picture a young girl, maybe she's 12, 14, someone who's smart, she's full of dreams, she loves school, and it's her escape, her hope for a better future. Now, I want you to imagine this. 1 week every month she stays home, not because she's sick, not because she's lazy, but because she's on a period and she has no sanitary pads. This is very disappointing and heartbreaking. How is it possible that in the 21st century, a time of artificial intelligence, space exploration, and medical miracles, something as basic as sanitary pad can stand in between a girl and her education, between a woman and her dignity? This is very heartbreaking. Madam Moderator, through my advocacy around menstrual health, I've witnessed firsthand how the intersection of bodily autonomy and mental health profoundly impacts young girls in Zimbabwe and beyond. To me, bodily autonomy, it means the right to control your own body. But how can a girl claim autonomy when she cannot even afford a basic pad? When cultural taboos tell you menstruation is shameful, the psychological toll is very devastating. In Zimbabwe, period poverty, it remains a significant barrier to education and mental health. And in a study by Plan International, it has revealed that 25% of girls in Zimbabwe, they miss school during their menstrual cycle, with many resorting to unsafe alternatives like rags, leaves, just because they lack sanitary products. This lack of access not only affects their physical health, but also their mental well-being, leading to feelings of shame, low self-esteem, and anxiety. The stigma surrounding menstruation, it further exacerbates these issues, creating a cycle of silence and suffering. Imagine someone who's just 14 in a rural area in Zimbabwe who misses school every month because she cannot afford pads. She uses rags, she uses leaves, and even cow dungs to manage her period. When she leaks, boys, they laugh at her. Teachers, they call her dirty, and she internalizes this shame, believing her body is a curse. By 16, she drops out, convinced that she is unworthy of education. This is not just a story, it's the reality for 1 in 10 African girls. And with the youth and with the youth and period poverty, with the youth and period poverty movement, we have been addressing these challenges through initiatives like the Restore Your Dignity initiative, which is one of our flagship programs, which provides menstrual hygiene kits and education to girls in marginalized communities. And additionally, our Nourish Your program, it also focuses on intersection of nutrition, mental health, and menstrual health, promoting indigenous nutrient-dense foods that support overall well-being. These programs at the Youth and Period Poverty Movement, they aim to empower young people by providing them with the resources and knowledge to manage their menstrual health with dignity, thereby improving their mental health outcomes. The cultural context in my country, Zimbabwe, where terms like kufungisisa, a Shona term that means thinking too much, they are used to describe mental distress, and they highlight the need for cultural sensitive approaches to mental health. And the Youth and Period Poverty Movement's work, it aligns with this understanding by integrating mental health support into our programs, thereby ensuring that young people, they receive holistic care that addresses both their physical and also emotional needs. So by addressing period poverty and breaking the stigma surrounding menstruation, we can improve the mental health and overall well-being of adolescents, empowering them to lead healthy, fulfilling lives. And the Youth and Period Poverty Movement, we remain committed to this cause, advocating for policies and practices that support the rights and dignity of young people, not just in Zimbabwe, but in Zimbabwe and beyond. So to every young girl who's listening and hiding in shame today, your body is not a burden. Your period is not a curse. You deserve education, dignity, and dreams. Madam Moderator, I submit.
Thank you so much for that, Washington. It was a heartbreaking image, but I find comfort in just the fact that there are initiatives on the ground that's really helping young women and young people across the African continent. And I think something that's kind of been standing out a lot through our discussion so far is just a sense of unity and solidarity. It's just, people coming within their communities, in their countries, coming together, in the fight towards a better future, especially, I think, amongst the youth. And that kind of leads us into our last theme for this dialogue, which is on Pan-African youth solidarity. And I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Dala, a communications specialist. Ms. Dala, you may take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kezia. Thank you, everyone who spoke before me. I'm so honored to be part of such a insightful and deep conversation with brilliant people. So speaking of Pan-African solidarity, I mean, in my work, one thing that I've seen, and I think you can all agree, is that every single time youth, especially African youth from different corners, different countries with different perspectives come together, there's this transformative energy that builds up and change really happens. So an example I can give from Rwanda is something called the Youth Connect Africa. I don't know if many of you have heard of it. It would be interesting to hear after these sessions your experiences if you've ever attended some of those summits. So Youth Connect Africa started in Rwanda in 2012, and it was initially a local initiative or a platform for youth to come together, share ideas, talk about their challenges, but also get the opportunity to get skills, mentorship, and have access to opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise had access to. But by 2016, this initiative had caught the attention of the entire continent. And that year alone, youth from over 14 countries came to Kigali to learn from Rwanda's experience. So the beautiful thing about this is that they didn't just observe that year, they absorbed. They took lessons from what they heard and they started adapting all these lessons in their countries. For me, that demonstrates that Pan-Africanism or Pan-African solidarity, especially amongst the youth, is not dependent or doesn't have to wait for big institutions. It starts with young people, like most of you have mentioned. It starts with young people listening to each other and learning from each other. So an example of the impact of such platforms like Youth Connect is last year, there's a story of a young man, a young refugee boy from Burundi who was living in Mahama camp. So what he had done during the time at Mahama camp, he had developed a project of hydroponics and a poultry farm. And this aimed to tackle food insecurity in the camp, but also to train his peers and families within the camp to take ownership of the solution and be part of the solution. So with the support of institutions like UNHCR, he was able to attend Youth Connect last year. He was able to stand on stage in front of young leaders and presidents and industry experts and present his idea. It was a small idea that he thought would maybe cover just a small space within the IDP camp. But right after he presented his initiative, he was able to get collaborators, not only in Rwanda, but across the continent. He was able to get backing from experts, and he was able to get funding in order to expand this project beyond the IDP within Rwanda and to other countries. Right? So you can see the impact of such platforms. And this is one of the many, many success stories that come with platforms like Youth Africa. I mean, to date, Youth Connect has brought together over 100 million young Africans together. It has empowered 25 million young people with skills, and it has created over 10 million jobs. So you can see the impact. You can imagine the impact. So to answer the question really is that for me, with examples like Youth Connect Africa, it shows that Pan-African solidarity can happen and it is in action, but it has to be a daily practice. And it has to be led by youth who choose to collaborate instead of compete, who see themselves in the solutions of the others, who see themselves in each other's future. So I will leave it at that because I want to have some exchange on people's experience with Youth Africa Connect. So I'll stop there and maybe hear what others have to say.
Thank you so much for the insights. I think this dialogue so far has been just such an eye-opening experience. There's a lot of thoughts that have just kind of been brought to light to the front of my brain. With that being said, I think we're going to give a few minutes for any Q&As. So if there is anyone that is tuning in, you're welcome to kind of write your questions in the comments, and my colleague, Ms. Nandi, will kind of go through them. And even panelists, if you yourself have questions for one another, or if you have kind of further things you'd like to add on from what someone previously has said, the floor is now yours. So thank you.
Great.
Darla, you can speak.
Thank you. I wanted to maybe track back to a point that Nsika had talked about where he was asking us, how do we get ourselves before we start changing the narrative, before we start claiming certain changes, how do we how do we first believe in ourselves or change the perception about ourselves? And I wanted maybe, I'm not the moderator, but I wanted maybe to drive the conversation to the power of storytelling. I mean, for me as a communications expert or a communicator, storytelling for me is a powerful tool when it comes to solidarity or changing the narrative or changing the perspective of Africa in general, but of Africa in the minds of our youth. So can we dive into this and speak a little bit about it? This is to you, Kesia.
Yes, of course. We'll definitely discuss it further. Thank you.
Any comments? I don't know if Mr. Nsika wants to expand or share any opinions regarding that.
Yes, thank you, Nandi. I think that's a very important question, well, very important conversation, which a lot of young people are talking about at the moment, and even myself with the African think tank that we're creating for young people currently in South Africa. One of the ways we can address this thing is by having more African writers writing the African story, and those who are in theater, put our stories in play, put our stories into film. One of the debates I always had, my grandfather, for those who don't know, is a freedom fighter, PAC stalwart, and I engage him a lot on these conversations, and we always argue about the truth of the known story, for example, which is a Xhosa story, for those who don't know, which is apparently how the Xhosas were defeated after 100 years of war because of this one young lady, and he doesn't believe the story, right? Which I don't either, but I think the issue we have is that all our history is taught to us by people who aren't even a part of our culture, because they had more ink. They wrote, they told, they spoke, and that's our issue. We need to kind of redraw it and reconstruct it for ourselves, because we can't just say tomorrow we wake up and then I say this is what it means to be an African. Then tomorrow you wake up in Ghana and you say this is what it means to be an African. We need to draw this conclusion by first retracing our history and rewriting that story in its most genuine form, and then we link it to where we are now and we draw our future. And as she said, I think it was Dala or someone else, I can't remember, who was raising the point that everything's been written before. It has. It's the same point I was making, that the Agenda 2063 has been spoken about more than 80 years ago. So these are old concepts that need to be materialized, but we can't do it without working on the past and realizing where we are now.
That's great. That's very insightful. Is there any panelist who wants to expand on what Mr. Nsika just said? Because it is important that as Africans, we write our own stories from our own perspective, the way we want to show up to the world. Maybe Miss Tamanda wants to say something.
Hi, everybody. So one thing that really scratched an itch in my brain was the storytelling. Storytelling is something magnificent. It's very underrated, especially in something like mental health as well, because everybody has a very different way they have gone through something that is so similar. And that is why storytelling is so powerful, because you see and you connect with each other so much better that way. And I think that's something that is very lost on us as Africans, especially when we were, I would like to believe, the original storytellers, but when it comes to things that are of painful nature or something that is a struggle or anything of that sort, as young people, we should be able to tap into storytelling to be able to connect with one another, not only for being safe spaces for one another, but also just to elevate each other. I think in my country, we like to call it kutukula, meaning to raise each other up. And we do that by telling stories to each other or personifying what we have gone through. And that's something that is a lost art in activism in so many other areas when it comes to being an African child. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tamanda. Are there any questions on the chat? I don't see any questions. The floor is open to anyone who wants to comment on anything, opinions, views, because this has been a rich, insightful conversation from a great panelist.
I want to quickly add onto the storytelling aspect, if I may.
Yes.
There's something that I picked up from a colleague of mine who, when in discussion of deepening this sense of shared identity as Africans, and this is where the idea of storytelling comes in, and a lot of you have said it. But he said something that sticks with me and helps me in any exercise that I do that has to do with storytelling. And he said that for us to really create that sense of shared identity, our stories must be real, as in REAL. So that's to say that our stories should be representative, they should be exchange driven, they should be accessible and rooted in language justice. So I won't go into the different points, but you can see exactly all those key points have been raised by everybody in their different way. But this is something that for me helps me in terms of telling stories or even helping others to tell their story. I submit to that.
Yes. There is a comment. I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment. It's saying on the same topic of storytelling, I also do not understand how it has been hard for us to leverage that skill when we are the main creators of it. I agree with you, Tamanda. Sometimes I feel that we have been made to hush and quiet down on our own Africanness. So maybe though through that we had forgotten or lost the essence. Now my question would be, how best do we do that? How best do we bring back that art and that identity that is rooted in our Africanness, which is storytelling? Don't know if any panelist wants to expand, maybe Danielle or Rosavita.
I am thinking right now, Nande. I don't think that that's an easy question to answer. So let me think about it, and then I'll respond with my opinion.
Rosavita. Or anyone can share, because it is an interesting question and a very difficult one that I'm sure a lot of people in our space often ask themselves, like, how do we go back to that? How do we ignite that sense or essence of storytelling that is deep rooted in our identity as Africans?
Hi, Nande.
Yes.
Can I have a small go? All right. So my initial thoughts and ideas are finding those spaces that young people are in. Of course, it's not everybody that sits around a fireplace in the evening, the whole family comes together or the community comes together as it used to be done in hundreds of years ago. So I think it starts with the spaces that the youth are in. And there's a lot in the creative spaces, in the arts, in the performing arts, in the digital space. And I think it's up to you and me, whoever is interested in this storytelling component, to chart the spaces and to leverage on what we have at our disposal. Currently, a lot of young people find themselves in the digital space, and there's a lot going on. And I'm happy, even from the literature space that I find myself in terms of promoting the reading culture across Africa. I find that there's a lot that technology has to offer in that we've been able to leapfrog as a continent and find those spaces and chart our stories in those spaces as well. In terms of the young people that are actually writing, the young people that are involved in the media industry as well, looking at the spaces of Netflix and the other channels where we're creating and charting our stories, the entertainment industry as well. And so it's a matter of finding, having a reflection on the different spaces and sectors that the youth are in, what it is that ignites their imagination and their ability to tell stories. It might not be in the traditional way, but in charting these spaces and crafting our own unique stories as a continent in the different spaces that we find ourselves in. So one of them, like I said, the digital space is growing, the literature space is growing, the entertainment space is growing, the there's a lot that we could leverage on if we reflect and deliberately leverage on those spaces, looking at a continent that is 60% under the age of 25. There's a lot that we could garner from creating spaces and going back to the storytelling that's already inside our blood. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mwanja. Danielle, you can have the floor.
Yeah, I'm just thinking now. So within the program that I'm part of at IJR, we have a project called Memory, Arts and Culture. And it's an old project that went away and then came back recently. So we're still in the beginning stages again of the project. And we're working with young people from Mzimkhulu in KZN. And storytelling is one of the methodologies that we use in our workshop spaces. But it's not just the way that we use storytelling, it's not necessarily just for performance or for content creation in a sense. It's to get young people within that space to connect with one another, but to also connect with themselves, with their identity, with their history, with their communities, and also to reclaim all of that history and reclaim that identity. So I don't know, perhaps there's a shift that needs to happen when we think about storytelling, that it's not supposed to be for performance necessarily. But going back to the root of storytelling, it's a way of remembering, it's a way of carrying history and carrying information. It's a way of connecting people. It's a way of imagining the future. So I don't know, maybe there's a decolonial kind of work that needs to go into storytelling. What is storytelling? How do we do it? What do we intend to do with this thing? That decolonial work perhaps needs to happen before everything else. I don't know if that makes sense or if that is helpful.
Yes, it does. It does. Darla, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely, Daniel. I think this issue of decolonizing storytelling touches on that issue of language justice as well. If we are creating these spaces for people to tell their stories, we must also create spaces where our young people, anyone really, is comfortable to tell their stories in their indigenous or local languages. I think if we're talking about memory, if we're talking about remembrance, it is easier for somebody to transmit that in a language that they're comfortable with. It also tells the person telling the story or even listening that their way of living or their way of expressing themselves is actually impactful or useful and they matter. I submit.
Yeah, I'm also just thinking, there was a book that I read a few months ago by Ngugi wa Thiong'o on decolonizing African literature. And the work that he had done in Kenya while he was still alive, may he rest in peace. But I found it to be so insightful because colonization it wasn't just a simple matter of land theft, but there was a violence that took place and was inflicted on people's psyche and sense of identity and sense of being. And then a lot of the things and traditions that we had on this continent was undervalued or undermined or taken over with Western ways of doing things, storytelling inclusive of that. So when we think of storytelling today, African literature today, we think of it in books, and a lot of it is in English, perhaps. Perhaps we need to move away from that. Perhaps we need to not move away entirely from print. I'm not trying to suggest that, but just rethink what does African literature look like? What does African storytelling look like within the framework of decolonization?
Yes, Danielle. Redefining what it looks like currently. Ntsika, I see your hand is up.
Yes, and Daniel actually touched Daniela. I don't know if it's Daniela or Danielle, sorry, but touched exactly on what I wanted to talk about. The African language question is such an exciting question, and you cannot talk about it without tracing back to the people who were debating it for the longest of time, Chinua Achebe and Ngugi wa Thiong'o. They really drove home both sides of the argument very well. With Chinua Achebe really nourishing the ground and making us understand why it's important to still use English. But Ngugi wa Thiong'o, as Danielle said, drove home the point of the importance of using our language to tell our stories or to even make an argument, you know. He actually makes a point. One of the quotes I like from him is, English is a measurement of intelligence, and African language is what's the ending? English is African language is a indication of barbarism or something like that. And that's so true, you know, that is so true. I know from experience, I was once in a shuttle coming out. I went to Varsity College Sandton, for those who don't know. So I was taking a shuttle out of school going to Gautrain Station. And at the back, there were black Tswana girls, and there were two colored ladies along the windows. So I called the first colored lady and I asked her to call the lady in front of her in Xhosa. So obviously Xhosa is not a very popular dialect in Johannesburg. So they obviously, all of them don't know it. So I tell this girl, but she can see from my pointing that I'm saying she must call the girl in front of her. So she understands and she calls the girl in front of her. Then I speak in English. And I tell this girl, sorry, can you please open the window if you don't mind? Then she opens the window and then the girls at the back laugh. Keep in mind, these are black girls at the back, black Tswana girls. And their comment after that shocked me. So I asked them why they're laughing, and their comment was, we thought you can't speak English because you're Xhosa. And I was so shocked by that because I was like, do you honestly, firstly, I don't know what they think is going on in the Eastern Cape. That's just the first thing I must raise. And then secondly, it's just so indicative of even Africans, actually back to that point I was retracing, I was starting with, of our view of ourselves as Africans. So even the African child believes that if an African is speaking an African language, they are barbaric and they don't know. They're not smart enough. They shouldn't even be here. You know, what is this person doing in this university? How is he understanding the work? Because clearly they thought I couldn't understand English. You know, so that is English is that measurement of intelligence, and Africanism and African language is like a measuring stick for barbarism, and that's completely it's an issue, you know. And I find that it's an issue that we need to address as Africans, as African youth in particular. We need to address that issue. And it must not only be stories of old. I know I raised the issue of telling our stories from the start. I'm the one that raised it, I know that. But we cannot let it just be that. We must also be telling the stories of now. I think we are moving past Rhodes Must Fall as if it's nothing, no one's business. Nobody's writing about Rhodes Must Fall. I haven't read a book yet about Rhodes Must Fall. I'm still waiting for Africans to write about it. I'm still waiting for Africans to tell the story of Fees Must Fall. How was that? You know, what was that moment like when that student threw feces at the statue outside of UCT? For the students who were in that room, those stories must be told. You know, so all of it, there's so much. There's a backlog of stories that need to be told, Sis Nandi. And this is the platform, I think, where we should be encouraging that thought, that idea. So yeah, that's basically what, it's a very exciting topic. I'm sorry, I must be jumping on my chair now.
This is the space for that. Don't apologize. Asemahle, I see your hand is up.
Hello. So for me, I just want to comment on a few things, and on the issue of decolonization within the space of sites of memory. I'm doing my research on sites of memory in South Africa, which is like a lack of memorializing the coloniality. So I feel like for me, in terms of storytelling and in terms of preserving memory and retelling our history from our own perspectives, I feel like we need to promote for the sites of memory that already exist that tell our history from our point of view, not the statue that you see in front of Parliament in South Africa, which really does not tell our history from our point of view. I feel like when we promote the sites of memory, it's when we try to decolonize all of that. And I think this was channeled by the Rhodes Must Fall movement, which then says that tell our history not as people who were being conquered, but as people who resisted apartheid. And also, Mwanja spoke about meeting young people in spaces where young people are. And I always advocate for TikTok because I am a TikTok fan. There's so many videos there that are 3 minutes long that tell a rich history of our own people, which can then also be sort of like a challenge to young people to actually go and read more and write more and want to actually write from their own perspectives and consult their own bodies of knowledge at home. We have grandmothers, we have grandfathers who know this history, but it's just that we don't go so much to go and ask for about that history, and also tracing back to our own way of disseminating information. We used to have Nzomi, we call it Nzomi in this Xhosa, which is folklore, which is how we got some type of to preserve our memory and also to tell our own memory in a way in which our own grandfathers understood it. So yeah, that is my 2 cents.
Very insightful, Asemahle. Danielle, after you, we're going to hand over to Mwanja for the closing remarks. You can, the floor is yours, Danielle.
Yeah, I'm just going to add my quick 2 cents as well. Asemahle just said something that made me remember this thing that we did a few years ago in one of the communities where we walk, which is a historical walking tour, where we got elders of the community together with young people into one space. And we walked around the community, young people as well as those of the older generation. And the older people were pointing out sites from their days growing up, who used to live at this house, who got arrested here during apartheid, who was displaced here, where did they come from? Those were the kinds of stories older people were sharing on that historical walking tour. And young people were jotting down notes as they were taking that tour and also taking pictures. And in so doing, we're documenting history and documenting the stories and the lives of those who came before them. And I think that was really powerful in asserting that people like us existed, yeah, long before colonization. I just think it was a really great way of saying that, you know, Seskona, we are here, we exist. So I think for those of the panelists who might be interested in this, I think this is a brilliant methodology if you're looking to connect people across generations, if you're looking to transfer historical knowledge to the next generation, to the younger generation. I think this would be a great methodology to employ. And I think it's very doable as well. Yeah, that's it for me.
Yes, thank you so much, Danielle. Mwanja, over to you.
Well, our distinguished speakers, our guests, and to all the young people who've joined us today, thank you. As we come to the close of this vibrant and inspiring dialogue in honor of the Day of the African Child, we're reminded that today is more than just a commemoration. It's one of the days and the platforms that we can use as a call to action. And it is a call to remember also the courage of those who came before us, particularly the youth of 1976, who gave their lives so that we could stand here today and speak freely about the Africa that we wish to see. Through your voices, your stories, and your innovative solutions, we have seen that young people across this continent are not waiting to be invited to the table. Oh no. As young people, you are building your own tables, creating your own pathways, and forging powerful connections across borders. As we've heard from the different panelists representing different countries and different regions this afternoon, you are living proof that Africa's future is not only bright, it is already in motion. The conversations we've shared today about lived realities, activism, mental health, and Pan-African solidarity, and not to mention storytelling that we've just ended off with, have not only deepened our understanding, but have reignited our collective responsibility to support, to amplify, and to walk alongside the youth in their journeys. At the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, I'm glad to say that we remain committed to creating platforms like these ones that we've had today, where young people are not simply participants, but leaders, decision makers, and visionaries shaping a just and peaceful Africa. Let us live here today with the resolve that these conversations should not end. I've seen the comments coming through the chat, but that we should continue to co-create solutions, to advocate for spaces where youth voices are heard and valued, and to foster solidarity that transcends borders in the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Thank you to each and every one of our brilliant speakers, and to all our participants, and to our team for making this dialogue possible today. Your presence has made this a truly meaningful engagement. May we continue to order the legacy of the Day of the African Child, not only in words, but in action. Thank you very much. Over to you, Kezia.
Thank you for that, Mwanja. And I just want to end off by thanking our participants and most importantly, our panelists for such an insightful discussion. As we leave today, we leave this dialogue, I think the one word that keeps coming to mind is hope. I think we've touched on hope with regards to the youth, the hope that the actions that they do now will help future generations of youth to come. And I must admit that sometimes with what's going on in the world, we kind of do lose that hope. But from dialogues today and from dialogues similar to this, I feel that little flame of hope in my heart just reignites. So I just want to thank you all for this. And as everyone's mentioned, the time is too short. So let's hope that we can carry on with these conversations to come. Thank you all for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful day further. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kezia. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.